Chapter 42. Dragon to Dragon. There was snow everywhere as far as her eyes could see. It was a wide expanse of white that oozed the might of winter. And yet she could not feel the biting cold associated with the snow. Daenerys walked aimlessly through the snow with no idea what she was doing or what was happening. She just walked for what felt like hours to no end. Only the howling winds gave her companionship as she trekked the wide expanse of snow. She walked and walked until she finally reached a small cliff. Looking down from the cliff, her breath caught in her throat as she saw the innumerable whites surrounding one heart tree. "My time has come." Daenerys suddenly turned around at the voice behind her back. "Brynden? Is this a dream?" The son of Aegon the Unworthy smiled. "Dreams have always been our family's greatest asset and curse. Come, princess. I must show you something before it is too late," said Brynden, reaching out with his hand and poking her between her eyes. Dany felt like she was drowning for a moment. She could not breathe as she felt herself getting sucked into a whirlpool of sorts. Her vision went blank for a moment, and then a small tunnel of light gradually appeared before her eyes. She let out a gasp and looked around wildly as the snowy plains gave way to a recently acquainted chamber in Dragonstone. Her eyes traced the carved likeness of Westeros on the painted table. "I'm in Dragonstone Castle," Daenerys thought with some measure of amazement. Not only that, she was frozen in place as an unfamiliar man with Valyrian traits sat at one end of the table looking intently at the painted table. "If you could move to this side, my dear." Brynden suddenly appeared to her right. Before she could ask anything, the door to the chamber opened and two women stepped into the chamber. The Conqueror and his sister wives Rhaenys and Visenya. Brynden whispered to her, making Daenerys' eyes widen in surprise. From one look at the two women, Daenerys easily identified her infamous ancestors. As rumors often spoke, Rhaenys' beauty was beyond compare, while Visenya carried her famed sword Dark Sister fastened on her hips with a belt. "Brother, it is done," Rhaenys said, handing over a dagger fastened on her hips to Aegon. "Thank you, sister." Aegon pressed a kiss against Rhaenys' cheek as he took the dagger from her hands. "Look closely at the dagger, princess," Brynden whispered to her, making Daenerys look closely at the dagger in the Conqueror's hand. Aegon placed the dagger against a smoldering fire in the room. The Valyrian steel blade gleamed under the light provided by the fire. Looking closer, Daenerys noted that was not the sole interesting fact about the dagger. There were Valyrian letters gradually making themselves visible as the dagger got heated further. "From my blood come the prince that was promised, and his will be the song of ice and fire." Aegon read from the blade even before Daenerys caught up with the inscription. "The ravens have been sent to all the great houses of Westeros. It won't be long before they give us a reply," said Visenya. "They'll not bend so easily. We proceed as Visenya suggested by reaching out to the lords of the Riverlands to make a common cause against the Ironborn. But before that we shall consolidate our position near the Blackwater," said Aegon. "A lot of people will die," Rhaenys whispered. "That's true. But it'll be a pittance compared to the alternative. All life will be snuffed out if I ignore my dream. The enemy of all life gathers strength beyond the wall while the lords of Westeros fight each other for petty grudges. A Targaryen must unite the 7 kingdoms if this continent is to survive. Dreams will not make you King Aegon," said Visenya. "No. But dragons will," said Aegon, taking to his feet. "Prepare yourselves and your dragons. We take the Blackwater Rush and everything around it." "I think that's enough," Brynden whispered. Daenerys found herself sitting up on her bed inside the Red Keep. She was sweating profusely despite the cold night that was blanketing the city. "I'm afraid this will be the last time I'll be talking to you, my dear," said Brynden, suddenly appearing by her bedside, startling Daenerys. "What do you mean?" "The Night King is coming for me. My time in this world is short, so listen carefully. Daeron knows of the enemy, but he underestimates them because he thinks the wall will keep them out from the 7 kingdoms. You, my dear, must shift his focus to the wall. Finish what you have to do in the south quickly and focus your attention on the enemy beyond the wall." After saying his piece, Brinden disappeared from Daenerys' chambers, leaving her alone to stew in the silence of her chambers. For some time, she sat there in her bed mulling over everything she saw and learned from the dream. The fact that the war of conquest launched by Aegon I was in part influenced by a dream was news to her. She could not recall Viserys, or anyone else for that matter, had ever mentioned this facet of the conquest in her presence. The Whites gathering beyond the wall was another concern. She had yet to see the so-called Night King in her dreams, but she didn't doubt the warnings issued by Bloodraven. If the Night King can breach the wall, then every living being south of the wall could fall victim to this scourge. The army of the dead could butcher their way through the north and raise an even larger army. Even their dragons would prove to be effective if the number of Whites increases any further. There were only 2 dragon riders, and they can't be everywhere if the Whites split up once they somehow breach the wall. The affairs in the south have to be dealt with promptly, Daenerys thought. XXXXXXXXXX. Daeron let out a pleasant hum as he enjoyed the hot water inside the bathtub. He could feel his muscles relaxing as the temperature seeped under his skin. It was early morning in King's Landing, with a layer of darkness still hanging around the city combined with smoke and fog hanging in the air. It'd have been a boon if the fighting had all but stopped once he had threatened the Lannisters on Dragonback. Unfortunately, not everyone surrendered. Some tried to flee and some resisted, which made his men saddled with the difficult task of hunting down Lannister men. To make things worse, there was no sign of Tommen Baratheon anywhere to be found inside the Red Keep. An absconding king was the last thing he wanted, so he had his men sweep the Red Keep and much of the city for the missing monarch, but that search turned up nothing so far. He still remained hopeful that the men might find the last bastard of Jaime Lannister. The kid couldn't have gone far with the city in complete lockdown. Even if Tommen somehow managed to escape the city, it'll be all for naught. Both Jaime and Cersei were languishing in the black cells under heavy guard, not to mention the Lannister army that was marching to aid the city was also in tatters thanks to Daenerys. This left the Westerlands leaderless and amenable to his demands. Many Westerland houses have already deserted the Lannisters by refusing to send men to defend King's Landing. Instead, they have chosen to bunker down in their castles to see who would emerge victorious. The first thing he did after having the Lannister twins thrown into the black cells was to borrow Lord Ricker's maester. Ravens flew from the Red Keep mostly to all the keeps of Westerlands, demanding their immediate surrender and oaths of fealty. He didn't mince words and straight up threatened them with revoking their status as lordly houses or knightly houses should they defy House Targaryen. He was hoping the Westerlanders see sense and bend the knee, thereby avoiding an extended military campaign in the Westerlands. He let out a sigh before quickly finishing up his bath. There was ample work to be done, and time waited for no one. The Northmen have taken control of the black cells as you ordered, Your Grace. The prisoners we took were also chained to the cells as you ordered. Sir Edwin Manderley reported dutifully. Good. Daeron hummed, pleased to know that his orders were carried out meticulously as they descended a set of stairs that led to the black cells. While he certainly trusted Sir Edwin to not lie, he still preferred to inspect the prisoners with his own eyes. The black cells were certainly difficult to navigate or escape from, but he wanted to make sure his prisoners were properly guarded all the time. The guard duty is rotated amongst the men as I ordered. Aye, Your Grace. Eve made the arrangements to rotate the guards at noon, evening, and morning. I also made sure all guards are Northmen, Sir Edwin reported. Daeron nodded as he passed outside a long line of cells with guards standing dutifully watching over the prisoners. All surviving Lannister knights and anyone of importance allied with the Lannisters were in the black cells. He paid them no heed, but he stopped when he came to the cell that was holding a lean, gray-haired man dressed in the garb of a maester. This is Qyburn, Your Grace. He is a former maester who served as Mater of Whispers, Sir Edwin explained. A shame you are behind bars. The 7 kingdoms require learned people in the days to come. Your work with Clegane was quite interesting. Shame his head is now mounted at the walls of the Red Keep," said Daeron, eyeing the aged man for any response, but nothing came except for a dispassionate stare. "They'll let him stew for a couple more days in the cell with only water for sustenance. That should make the former maester more talkative," he thought before moving to the next cell. In the next cell, Cersei Lannister was held as a prisoner with her arms bound to the wall with chains. The chains holding the former queen of the 7 kingdoms rattled as Daeron stared at the woman who had caused so much chaos and death. The Lannister woman looked fearfully at him but did not utter a word. He suspected that was because of the swollen cheek. "I thought I ordered the men not to get handsy with the prisoners?" Daeron asked, looking displeased. "The men didn't harm her, Your Grace. She was already wounded before she was taken prisoner." "That's a little difficult to believe, Sir Edwin." Daeron scrutinized the Manderly knight, who sweated a little under his stare. "He speaks the truth. Your men didn't harm her." "I did." Daeron looked at the next cell from which the sound came. Inside the cell, a man covered in burn scars sat against the wall, with his legs and arms bound with chains. "I'm surprised to hear that, Sir Jaime. A few years back you threw my cousin from a tower to protect your sister and her bastard children. Has the grand love story of the Lannister twins come to an end?" Daeron asked coolly. "I suppose our story will come to an end soon enough, just like Rhaegar and Lyanna," said Jaime, squinting his eyes to get a better look outside his cell. "You barely look like a Targaryen. But I suppose looks do not matter when you have a dragon." "No, it does not," Daeron agreed. "So, how'll our story end? Is it going to be Dragonfire?" Jaime asked. "Tempting, but no. It'll show you the same courtesy your son showed to my uncle. You'll get the block." "That's a surprise," said Jaime before falling silent. "I reserve my dragon's flames for those of some importance. With King's Landing falling to me, your value has significantly gone down, but your son, on the other hand." Daeron let the threat hang, watching the worry enter Jaime's eyes. He could even hear muffled sobs coming from Cersei's cell as well. "You lie. Tommen is safe and out of your grasp," Jaime said, hotly straining against the chains. "Is he?" Daeron smirked before taking his leave from the black cells. He gave no heed to the desperate pleas or appeals for mercy from his prisoners. "Make sure no visitors are allowed for the prisoners without my permission," Daeron ordered once they were out of the black cells. "As you will, Your Grace." Daeron was about to seek out Lords Ricker and Buckwell were charged with finding Tommen Waters, but Your Grace. It was none other than Barristan the Bold who was calling for his attention. "Sir Barristan?" He nodded at the old Kingsguard knight. "The Queen cordially invites you to join her for breaking fast. I have some matters that need attention. Daenerys has looked forward to meeting the last of her family. She has not had a good childhood, and her brother, Prince Viserys, was not exactly what you'd want as a family. So, please." Daeron eyed the old knight for a moment before agreeing reluctantly. He followed the old knight quietly, thinking of the best ways to deal with Daenerys Targaryen. Frankly speaking, he was of two minds when it comes to Daenerys Targaryen. On one hand, her armies and her dragons give the 7 kingdoms the needed stability and fighting chance against the others. He held no notions that the years that follow will be anything but peaceful. The finances of Westeros were in shambles. Entire tracts of riverlands were burned down in the war. The able-bodied men of Westerlands have been decimated in the recurring battles. The Reach was fighting an invasion on 3 fronts. An entire generation of knights and lords were wiped out from the Stormlands, plunging the land into banditry and lawlessness. The less about Dorne and the Iron Islands, the better. In this chaos, Daenerys' presence could function as a stabilizing factor because of her legitimacy and power. On the other hand, Daenerys has a messiah complex. Her actions are too much impulsive and heedless of thinking about any consequences. Sure, No one can be perfect and mistakes can be often made. However, this was no simple game. In politics, every game was a game that involves bloodshed. Every action has certain consequences. The whole issue with the fight against slavery and the raiding of Volantis was somehow going to come and bite Westeros in the ass. He just knew something very dangerous was going to get unleashed from that part of the world. The balance of power in Essos has irrevocably been destroyed. It only takes one ambitious man to light the powder keg that was Essos. And if history has proven anything, men never lacks ambition in times like these. In the immortal words of Peter Baelish, chaos is a ladder. That was why he was going out of his way to keep a friend in Braavos. I never imagined Prince Rhaegar would leave a son of Lady Lyanna's body. If I had known then, Ser Barristan trailed off. Daeron was tempted to say to the old knight that raping a minor girl is not exactly a good or safe way to produce children, but he swallowed that urge. Mostly because he was content to keep the exact details of his origins in the dark. Rhaegar may have exchanged some stupid vows before a weirwood tree, but that was no legally binding marriage. Fortunately, he had a dragon to make anyone question the nuances behind his parentage, and thereby his claim over the Iron Throne. But that doesn't mean his claim was not going to be shaky in the future. The solution to that potential problem comes in the form of Daenerys Targaryen. Her parentage was not in question, nor was her legitimacy. Despite never setting foot on Westeros, everyone acknowledged Daenerys' claim to the throne because of her clear-cut connection to Aerys. Marrying her was the only way to ensure his legitimacy remained consistent throughout his reign. Uniting their claims, dragons and armies would strengthen their position. They were stronger together than apart. Their union would cement their rule and provide some form of stability to the Seven Kingdoms after these ruinous wars. At least, their marriage could avert a war for succession in their generation. Daeron shook his head, clearing those thoughts away. He was getting ahead of himself. No matter what happened, the Iron Throne must come under his control. As it stands, he was sure that it'd be better off in his hands rather than in the hands of anyone else. It was a rather arrogant perception to think that he knew better than everyone else, but as it stands, that perception was not exactly wrong. He came to a halt as he reached the chambers of Daenerys Targaryen. "Wait here," he said to his guards as Ser Barristan held the door open for him. "Daeron." Daenerys greeted him with a radiant smile by the doorway. "Daenerys." He smiled back a little awkwardly, not expecting her to show up right at the doorway. XXXXXXXX. Daenerys looked on curiously as her nephew declined the wine offered by one of the servants. "I'm told it is the finest casket of arbor gold in the Red Keep," said Dany, taking a small sip from her glass. "It's good." Daeron grinned but politely declined the beverage nonetheless. "Are you not a wine person? Or maybe you prefer Dornish red?" Dany said, nursing her glass in her hand, eyeing her nephew like a puzzle. "I can have the servants fetch it for you." "I appreciate the offer, but no. I keep a limit on the wine I consume," said Daeron, taking a bite of the bread after dipping it in the tomato sauce. "Why? Did Lord Eddard not allow you wine in his halls?" Daenerys asked without thinking. It was only when the words slipped out of her mouth that she realized the rudeness in the question. However, Daeron only looked thoughtful for a moment. "You are not wrong. Lord Eddard always cautioned us against developing a compulsion to wine or ale." There was an awkward silence between them, and she suspected her nephew was consumed in memories of the past. Daenerys looked to change the subject rather than get lost in the past. She sifted through her mind, looking to change the direction of their talk, when a small glint of steel caught her eye. It was her nephew's sword, and suddenly she remembered the Valyrian steel her nephew had brandished against her advisors yesterday. "That sword? It's Valyrian steel, isn't it?" she asked, leaning forward in interest. "Can I see it?" Her nephew shrugged, drawing the blade out of its scabbard. The blade sang as it cut through the air. The distinctive rippling patterns on the surface of the blade signified the mark of the freehold steelwork. But more than that, Daenerys found the blade more interesting because of its history. This was the same blade wielded by Visenya Targaryen during the conquest. "It is beautiful," Daenerys whispered, drinking in the sword's beauty. "It's far more beautiful than any Eve seen so far. It's sleek, designed for a woman's hand. This is... Dark sister, I know. You are not the only one with dreams," Daenerys said, her eyes straying to the surprised gray eyes of her nephew. "Blood Raven?" Daeron asked curiously. Dany just nodded as her eyes strayed back to the sword. The red ruby at the end of the hilt gleamed. It looked as if the snarling dragon pommel was staring her down. "May I?" she asked, looking hopefully at her nephew. "Mind the edge, though." Daeron offered her the sword without any inhibitions. It was quite light in her hands. Taking to her feet, she held the sword with two hands, marveling at the fact that one of the most important heirlooms of her family was in her hands. She made an experimental swing, and for a moment she pretended she was Visenya Targaryen. "I had often dreamed of what it'd be like to hold this sword. In Braavos, I had often pretended to be Visenya Targaryen." Daenerys laughed, feeling silly at her past self. "It was a silly dream of mine to grow and become as fierce as Visenya Targaryen." Daenerys shook her head and handed over the sword to her nephew, who took the sword gracefully. "You've done better than Visenya Targaryen. You've amassed a large army and birthed 3 dragons into the world. Cities of Essos have fallen before you. These are no easy feats." Daenerys preened under the compliment, especially coming from her nephew. She could not place it why, but an acknowledgement of her successes and might from Daeron felt far more precious than the innumerable compliments she had received for many years. Perhaps 'tis because Daeron is kin a dragon, Daenerys thought. "I hate to spoil the moment, but we ought to discuss the matter of succession. It won't be long before our enemies learn of what happened in King's Landing. They'll plot and sharpen their knives, and gather their strength in the shadows. We must strike at them before they amass more strength," said Daeron, his easygoing manner vanishing in the blink of an eye. Daenerys turned her back on her nephew as she moved towards a nearby window, setting her eyes on Blackwater Bay. "I'm also aware that the situation is dire beyond the wall." Daeron shrugged. "Not yet. We still have some." "No, we don't," she said abruptly before looking seriously at her nephew. "I had a dream recently. We must focus our attention on the wall. But before that, we must settle the succession and gather the realm as Aegon had dreamed. I understand you've toiled in Essos working to take the Iron Throne. You have suffered and sacrificed much to reach here, and I don't deny you have a better claim before the lords of the 7 kingdoms. A house divided against its own cannot stand by itself. We must, I propose we marry and unite our claims." Daenerys boldly proposed, stunning her nephew into silence. "You have the support of the Vale of Arryn, Riverlands, and the North. If I'm not mistaken, you've some supporters from among the Crownland lords as well. I have my Unsullied, 2 dragons, a large fleet, some support from the Reach, and the support of Narrow Sea lords. Together we can restore House Targaryen as the royal house of Westeros. I'll crown you as Daeron III by my own hands." "Okay," Daeron whispered, nodding confusedly at how easy the succession was settled. "But I have certain conditions that you must accept in return." Daenerys quickly added, a grin tugging at her lips as she took in the flabbergasted look on her nephew. "Conditions? So long as they are reasonable, I'll forgive the intrusion, Your Grace." Ser Barristan slipped into the chambers, gaining their attention. "A guard waits outside for an audience of His Grace. He claims he has some sensitive information from Lord Ricker." "Send him in." "Well, hear what this guard has to say together," said Daeron, eyeing Daenerys, who smiled in approval. Ser Barristan allowed the guard to enter the chamber. "Your Grace, I was told to be discreet," said the guard, his eyes straying towards Daenerys and Ser Barristan. "The situation has changed. You may speak openly," said Daeron. "Tommen Baratheon has been found. the guard gasped out. "It seems today is a day of good fortune for House Targaryen," said Daeron, taking to his feet before addressing Daenerys. "I know we have not formalized our agreement, but I think we should speed up the process. The coronation must happen as soon as possible, and the Lannisters must be sentenced in court. With Tommen in our custody, the fictitious rule of the Baratheon dynasty comes to an end." XXXX Bran stared impassively into the sky high above. The sky was filled with dark clouds robbing the land of much-needed light. "Are you okay, Bran? Do you want to lie down?" Mira asked. "'Tis fascinating to see concern shining in your eyes," Bran thought, looking into her green eyes. They have been slowly tracing their way through the tunnels the children had made for safe travel. Hundreds of tunnels deep under the ground house the last of children that have survived men and the others. Having continuously used the green sight to learn all that he could from the weirwood trees, he struggled to see what was the present and the past. Sometimes, everything became a blur, making the past and present blend in unequal proportions. When reality itself becomes unfathomable, it becomes quite difficult to care. Bran attempted to smile and convey that he was quite comfortable. But he had forgotten exactly how to smile. He saw so much, so many lifetimes that spanned many millennia. The span of time men flourished in Westeros was dominated by war, hatred, cruelty, betrayal, greed, and despair. There was very little room for anything else. As someone who stood witness to all of that, it was very hard to care for those around him. He found more kinship with the children than men. He could now understand why they hid away from the world. A world of men was no world worth living for the children. However, he was not born as a child of the forest. Therefore, appearances have to be kept. "I'm quite fine, Mira." Mira smiled at him. He was fastened on a small harness on Hodder's back. "Hodder should be given some time to rest." "We are nearly there," said Bran, his other pair of eyes watching the spot where the last remaining giants have gathered, heeding the call of the children. The raven he was warding into had kept a close watch on the giants as well as the few free folk wandering close by the fist of first men. Suddenly he felt a familiar presence connecting with his mind. Bran blinked, and he was suddenly inside. He could see from the eyes of Bloodraven. There was an unbearable cold bearing down upon Brynden, the man who taught him to not walk but fly. Through Brynden's eyes, he saw an ice spear piercing through Leaf, who had bravely stood guard over Bloodraven despite knowing death would come for her. He felt sadness as he watched the child breathe the last. And there in the darkness, he saw the icy visage of the Night King, a being twisted by a moment of hatred and magic. In the end, even the children were affected by the darkness in men. Their grief and loss turned into hatred for men, which resulted in the birth of the Night King, a beast of darkness and cold. The scourge comes, Brandon Stark. Beware of the cold winds unleashed by the horn of winter. The enemy of all life has come, Brynden warned. Those were the last words he heard from Bloodraven before the Night King swung his ice sword. There was nothing but silence from the bond, and he could feel the magic of Bloodraven disappear from the world. "We have to hurry. The cave has fallen to the Night King," Bran said, once again finding some comfort in Mira's eyes. "How long will you remain as you are before you get swept away by the sea of darkness?"